Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I have returned. This might be a jump scare for most endgame players, but not only is this not the worst Anomaly Arbitration of all time, it actually has factual HP deflation. For apparently no reason, the night stages this time around are much more simple, and even the hardest one with anti-shield isn't too punishing compared to the last Anomaly Arbitration. I tried it with my other free-to-play accounts, and I've arrived at the same conclusion. This phase is just easier than the last Anomaly Arbitration. Why is it like this? Well, I may have an idea. Anyway, intro splash. So, let's go from the easiest to the hardest, like always. Thankfully, the numeral order is actually right this time. First, we have Night 1. The debuff is Taunting, which for this stage is more of a help to speed up some mechanics for most characters. The first wave has the Monkey and the IPC Grizzly. These bosses are so old I don't think I need to explain them any further. And the second wave has Argenti. The HP on this stage is comically low. The previous Night 2 was Pom Pom at 9 million single target HP on 2 health bars, and it was gated by a huge damage reduction and barely gave you much of self-harm mechanics at all, or even just rewards. Argenti constantly rewards you with low HP statues and only has 5 million HP at 2 bars. It's almost half the HP, and the first wave is very fragile too. So, what can you do to beat this? First of all, every enemy in this night stage is extremely predictable. The Monkey can be planned around with freezing if you have an ice unit, with Ice Break, RMC, and all that. And ordering your skill uses to your tankiest character can be really good at mitigating damage for Sustainless. The IPC Grizzly only attacks you once per turn if you kill fast enough. Argenti is similarly very predictable, and as long as you take care of the statues, he doesn't hit very hard and you hit even harder. Despite the taunting debuff, this is very simple to Sustainless since the RNG is very forgiving and the amount of hits you can take is unusually high. The amount of characters that work with this stage is very high too. There's even Herta runs for it, surprisingly enough. And due to the predictability of these bosses, you can replicate a good amount of YouTube clears as long as your build permits it with very little RNG. You can look at the Herta archive right now, and I'm not even filtering this with just clearing. These are 0 cycles, and the cheapest one is Himiko Nova at 2 cost. So I guess my tip here is to drop off your units with the lowest power level. Again, this is Anomaly Arbitration, so don't expect like a 2.x Yunli team to clear, but a decently updated team can do it pretty well. I can't really name all of the teams because there's just a lot that I can think off the top of my head, but pretty much any unit that got updated in late 3.x would just steamroll this. There's even a Butil 0 cycle that's pretty low cost compared to everything that he's done recently, which is pretty funny. I guess I don't need to list the teams then. This stage really is comically easy compared to the night stages we've had recently. The leaderboard right now is on 2 to 3 cost, and it's not surprising at all. Take the free W here with your worst team that can still viably clear, and you should be fine. Next is Night 2. The debuffs are Depowered and Flow Break, and honestly that is the worst part of this stage. On the first wave, you have the Joy Ascendant and then the Killer Clowns. The Joy Ascendant starts off as one enemy, and then they split off into 2 smaller HP bars, and then they split off again into 2 smaller HP bars. So this boss has basically 6 HP bars that you need to go through. The Clown steals your HP and attack, but if you hit it, it heals back your HP, and the 6th attack will give you an attack buff. The second wave is Svarog and another Clown. Svarog does a couple of non-threatening single target attacks, but on his second turn he will kidnap one party member with his hand, and you have to break his hand to free them. Svarog is pretty old, I don't think I have to explain him any further. And again, the HP is lower than usual. Svarog is 1 HP bar of 9 million, again Pom Pom had 2 bars of 9 million on the previous AA. The Joy Ascendant also has low HP, and the Clown has a normal amount of HP. But as we'll explain later, that's not really the problem with this stage. So what is the problem with this stage and how can you vault over it? Well, first of all, the clown healing you is very good for sustainless, and you kinda want them to live as long as possible because of that. The problem with this stage is depowered and the Joy Ascendant. The Joy Ascendant has a lot of bounce hits, which means you can get pretty unlucky with it. And let's say you're a team that uses normal energy rates to get all of their stuff going, like let's say a Tribbie, and it gets pretty rough. Because if your team can't ramp up fast enough, the Joy Ascendant is just going to kill you. Additionally, going too aggressive also has its problems, because when the Joy Ascendant splits, it summons at a very low amount of AV, and the more ascendants there are on the field, which is in the later portion, their bounce attacks get a lot worse. In my break run, I actually had to slow down who to kill, otherwise the split mobs would be too fast for Firefly to break, and the team just dies. If you can't clear the Joy Ascendants before the first cycle, you are not 3-starring this. But being able to reach the first cycle at least means you won't die, so you did something right at least. As for the second wave, Svarog really is just a punching bag, and after going through wave 1, you will have absolutely no issues with how simple Svarog is and his HP being decently low. There's also a bit of team building restrictions with Flow Break. You really do want a follow-up attack in some capacity, otherwise your damage slows down a lot. Permanent Terai is a catch-all answer for most teams in this fight, but unfortunately depowered makes the damage check actually kinda rough. So you kinda have to rely on teams that have very trivial energy needs, like Firefly and Kafka, or just don't care about their energy at all, like Finon or Acheron. Though Acheron is rough without Sustainless here, the damage check is just a bit too high for her. Speaking of which, let's talk in more detail with teams. There's normal resistances here, so brute forcing typically requires less Eidolons at least. The biggest hurdle is trying to find a team that doesn't care about depowered and flow break. Anything that uses Mortenax Blade is honestly gonna perform well here, given that the DPS themselves isn't too bad. Acheron from my experience struggles a lot, maybe it's because I don't have E4 Wealth though, but even then with a sustain it's really bad. Maybe Wealth E4 with Sustainless does well for Acheron though, I just don't have the resources to do that. Irene's teams do decently well. A lot of her teams are pretty good at squeezing damage in a short time to counter the Ascendant, like Aglaya or Anaxa, and her mechanic itself means there is already a ramp up anyway, so depower doesn't matter to them. Though from my experience it needs Sustainless to really do it well, especially for a character like Anaxa. RMC as a sustainless unit is obviously amazing for the delay, to give you some room to get rid of depowered. Firefly's energy gain is fixed. Finon destroys this too since he can disrupt flow break with his counter. Archer doesn't need his ult to do good damage, and funnily enough he can get around flow break by just switching targets every arrow shot. DOT is also pretty good here too since High Sealant melts their HP and depower doesn't hurt Kafka too bad. And yeah, the checkboxes are basically does good AoE, has a flow break counter in their team, doesn't rely on conventional ult uptime, has bursts of damage in a small period, either with high-speed teams like Break or frequent attacks like Ashveil. That's pretty much it. Again, this is a simple stage on the surface. Basically, you either have damage or you don't, but if you want to sustainless it, being able to control your damage for the Joy Ascendant is actually a huge play check, I guess. A huge skill check, I don't know, that you need to manage. I like this stage, honestly. Just playing it normally to 2-cycle, by the way, because 0-cycling this stage apparently just kinda sucks. It's not as easy as Night 1, and the debuffs kinda add to the interesting play you can make here with the Joy Ascendant. But it can be a pretty annoying roster check, all things considered. Now, the hardest stage, Night 3. And wow, all I have to say is that I hate Elation bosses. I speak this as someone that destroyed this with Ashveil and barely got by with Evernight on different accounts. This stage sucks, especially after seeing the previous two, so let's talk about it and why. The debuff is Hemivore, I believe that's how you say it. It does damage to you every turn. This can be blocked by shields, by the way, this is kinda misleading, so don't worry about DHPT sustaining, he's more than enough. The enemies though, oh my god. First, you have the Quantum Resmech, known for ruining the hopes and dreams of Archer and Castris without high cost. Then you have the Griffin, who opens with a decently strong blast attack and summons some annoying birds. Killing the birds will damage the main boss, so good news to AoE characters, I guess. Then you have the second wave, which is Full Wish, a boss famous for applying CC effects that can ruin a lot of runs and have 40% res across the board. Last time, this was a king stage that had a counter for this high res mechanic, and unfortunately this is now a knight stage, so you are just raw dogging that 40% damage decrease if you're not physical, lightning, or imaginary. Have fun with this because I sure didn't. This boss has 6.7 million HP, just to insult me further I guess, which is definitely on the lower side, but with no self-harm mechanics and the titanic amount of res, it's still really rough to go through if you're not being shilled. So how do you beat this boss? My tip for wave 1 is to just don't bring quantum characters and have some semblance of AoE damage. Unless you have like E2 Castris, I do not recommend quantum characters in this fight. If you can't kill fast enough, bring a sustain because Hemovore will absolutely ruin your life. Moving on to wave 2, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, you need a way to deal with AoE, especially if you're trying to run sustainless. This is because Full Wish just doesn't really hit hard at base, and she needs her flowers to take a turn and boost her damage with a buff called Wicked Grin. Killing the flowers before they take a turn is very important, not just because it means Full Wish is within your damage bracket to clear with a 3-star, but because it's outwardly necessary if running sustainless. If you can kill the flowers without letting them act, this is a sign that your damage is enough to 3-star. Second of all, you need a way to deal with the crowd control. There's 5 ways to deal with this. First, just be immune and don't care about it. Evernight and Finon are great at this. Second, you can have a lot of attacks. Ashveil and Blade co-sign to this. Third, you can be fast enough to outrun Full Wish reapplying it. For example, Hyacine is fast enough at 200 speed with some DDD procs from Tribbie, where she can keep pressing basic attack and it just wears off naturally because it only lasts for 3 turns. Fourth, just kill fast enough where you can make it to the second phase before you get CC. Because yeah, Full Wish removes your stacking debuff that becomes the crowd control if you switch phases. Do note that if you're already CC'd, that doesn't get cleansed. Lastly, you can be immune to it for a certain duration if you can fulfill the happiness gimmick by hitting the enemy 6 times or killing the flowers. On the second phase, Full Wish charges up this big attack that applies an uncleansable CC if she has Wicked Grin. Wicked Grin is the buff that the flowers give to her. To counter this, again, you can be immune at base, or you can get rid of Wicked Grin by killing 6 flowers and triggering the mechanic right below her HP bar. Again, you can also be immune to it if you can clear happiness stacks, as exampled by Tribbie in my footage. There's a surprising amount of optimization for this boss, but at the end of the day, it's a damage check, similar to Reaver and Nikador, but a lot more timing sensitive. The res is also really annoying since some teams do play well with the gimmicks, it's just that their damage gets walled without high enough investment. Like Evernight, for example. I needed her E1 just to 2-cycle this. And also, you just kinda need a bit of luck for these mechanics, especially if you're running Evernight. You want Full Wish to try and target her as much as possible. Speaking of which, time to talk about the teams. The type resistance matters a lot because of the Quantum Mech, and also Full Wish having 40% to non-weak. With that said, this is an Elation Shield boss, and Silverwolf and Evanescea destroys it. Funnily enough, Sparksy is resisted, so I don't know, so much for giving her a new outfit I guess. The other DPS that match well with both the mechanics and the type matchup is Finon, who just kinda doesn't care, Ashveil, whose entire team takes care of their own attack frequency, and Maide or Aglaya. Unfortunately, Maide and Aglaya's damage is quite low without Eidolons, as expected with units of their age. There's also characters whose damage is just so high, and has a decent enough matchup where they can still work great. Firefly Sustainless, especially with E2, works really well for this reason, since her high speed and blast damage cleave through the flowers pretty fast even with Hemovore. I used Evernight because not only is she immune to the CC, but despite the Ice Rush she can still decimate with just her Eidolon 1. Similar with Cast Risk too, but with higher cost. Again, this is reaching territory where you need specific strong costs, and anything after this can be a bit unrealistic. Either way, you have to throw in your strongest AoE team here. Due to the res, some characters like Evernight are at a 40% disadvantage that someone like Finon might actually be the answer compared to what you would usually bring. But due to the Hemovore debuff, some of your teams are at RNG's mercy to sustainless. This is the most difficult stage, so logically you have to put your strongest AoE team here, but the type resistances might reverse your conceptions a bit on who's the strongest character. Anyway, that's all for the night stages. Time for the king stage. So, moving on to the King stage. The King stage debuffs are Enrage, which is basically Gilgamesh's interest mechanic for some reason. And then you have Equilibrium. It is a new debuff. It increases the speed of your lowest speed party member, but decreases the speed of the fastest one. It's a pretty interesting debuff, honestly, since it's not purely negative, but it ends up mostly being a detriment. The only ones that aren't affected by this Equilibrium debuff are Surprise, Ashveil, since the sustain being slow doesn't hurt as much, and I guess Firefly, since Fugue and Dahlia are fine with tanking their speed stat. As for the buffs, you have this one, which increases skill and ult res penetration by a whopping 50% for the first slot unit. Incredibly potent for not just Himiko Nova, but Phynon, Acheron, and also Archer. Actually, all of the Fate units like this buff, especially because Graphia has 40% res, that having a 50% res pen is actually quite nice. The second buff is a follow-up attack buff, because Ashblade doesn't work well for the first one. We have to give something, right? Plus the boss is already weak to lightning and fire, so res pen doesn't really do that much for the Ashblade team. As for the last buff, it gives general team-wide res pen with 20% more to Elation. Wow, I wonder who uses this, right? As for the matchup, you have the PTSD-inducing horses, one on wave 1 with the Griffin, and on the second wave, you have 2 horses surrounding Graphia. I only saw one of these in this screen right here, and I almost got jump scared. I want to explain all the mechanics, but honestly just go to this website since it's much better at explaining Graphia. I'll just give you a rundown of the best and worst things about this fight, including the teams that do really well with it. First of all, the HP isn't any better or worse in my opinion compared to the last King stage. This fight can be purely annoying simply because of the amount of CC and RNG this enemy lineup has. The horses need you to ult on demand, otherwise you will eat a crowd control. That by itself is a manageable mechanic, but when Graphia can randomly CC you on top of that almost every turn, which either means giving up your turn or ruin your HP and SP economy, and then you add another horse that can be desynced action-wise due to bounce damage, and this fight can get ugly really quickly. In my first Ashblade attempt, I got flashbanged with almost 150 AB worth of delay from getting entangled, stunned, and doing absolutely nothing all the way to the third cycle. I tried it again with better luck, and it became a 1-cycle clear. That is a terrifying discrepancy, and I'm pretty sure I can 0-cycle it if I'm lucky enough. So if you're unable to clear this or 2-star this, it might just actually be a matter of luck. But you can control your luck with break timings and damage control. Just, don't blame yourself too much and know that luck is a huge factor in this fight. If I were to gauge the difficulty of this fight, it can be similarly obnoxious to the previous King stage, especially with how much more luck-based it is, and the Equilibrium debuff specifically makes some teams feel very terrible. Pretty luck-based to get anything other than a 6-cycle though. So that's all for each fight, and I guess it's time to talk about HP deflation. Because this Anomaly Arbitration is actually a noticeable HP deflation. Argenti is pathetically fragile and is more in line with 3.x bosses in terms of HP. Varog is less HP than usual but balanced by D-powered, still weaker than most modern Night stages though. And Full Wish is pretty rough, but compared to previous Nightmare stages like Pom Pom or Pollux, he's honestly not that bad. I'm not sure if Hoyo is actually taking in feedback that HP inflation has gone out of hand, because this has been going on for 2 patches straight now. I don't trust them fully because I have to see if the next patch has HP deflation to say that HSR is finally saved. But regardless, this is a surprising change of direction and kinda puts a hole in the idea that stronger units incentivize power creep. Himiko Nova, as we know right now, is an absurdly strong cheap DPS, and we're getting the weakest Anomaly Arbitration in modern times. Similarly, Mono Rem peaked in 3.7, which was a lull patch. On the other side of the coin, Ashveil main DPS needed more cost in 4.1 and had a terrible night stage lineup. Ashblade is now reaching peak performance and the content got easier. It really is up to the whimsy of the devs if they want the HP to increase or decrease, and this is the evidence of that. The counterexample to this though is you somehow believe that Gilgamesh being balanced is a cause to make the night stages easier, which I'm not gonna say it's completely impossible because that just sounds way too funny. I guess we have Gilgamesh and Saber to thank for this HP deflation. Long live the kings, I guess. Anyway, it's also not out of the ordinary for Hoyo to do lull periods where the meta is somewhat stable and then it shoots back up like a rocket. There was a lull period in 3.7 to 4.0 and then a massive spike in 4.1 in Anomaly Arbitration, and then it snowballed further into 4.2. So for now, I'm cautiously optimistic that the HP will regress and the meta actually becomes healthier. Surely the swimsuit Robin sales won't sway this any further, right? That's all the yapping for this Anomaly Arbitration. I'm loving the HP deflation, and even the hardest stage I can at least respect as somewhat interesting, especially compared to Pom Pom. Please never bring Pom Pom back to Anomaly Arbitration. I will literally commit violence. Like, comment, do the algo stuff, and I'll see y'all next time in my piloting streams, I guess. Bye!